Okay, so I thought we'd have a go at doing the eye in pencil, and it's really interesting to do. You obviously can do this in anything. The only biggest difference between pencil is we might use it more like a watercolor. I'll explain a bit more in a bit about that. But obviously you can, if you're using acrylic or pastel, then you can layer it up as normal, and the reverse really, you know, get your darks and your mids in and then the highlights on top. When we're working in pencil, I've just got a little bit of a strip here just to show you what I mean. Whatever we're doing in pencil, what we're looking at is the tone and the shade, and we're trying to find a best fit for each of the areas. Now, the reason I've got two photographs here of the eye is that actually what we think is, we think we need it to be the same in black and white to be able to replicate it. But actually, a lot of people find this too abstract because it's not, we can't always relate to exactly what each part is trying to show us. So it's really helpful to have the blue eye, really helpful, because things like this area here where you've got this all this shadow down here, if we didn't have that one, we would be thinking, now is that a bit of shade, or is it, what is it? I don't really know. Whereas if we look at that, we know it's a bloodshot eye. So then we kind of adjust the way we're thinking, and actually, you know, we might not make it quite as dark, for example, or, you know, make some of these, we might put a few more of these capillaries in, but you can't always see them when it's in black and white. So it's really valid, because I know a few people this morning in art class and absolutely, you know, said, oh, I'm glad you've got the black and white one so I can translate it. Actually, when we got going, they were like, no, I really need to look at the blue eye because I need to see what's going on there and what that means. So so don't be put off, you know, having to go at anything in colour and translating that into you know, into black and white, because it's it can be easily, you know, it actually it works really well. But I'll leave both there for the moment, just so that we know. So a little look. So with the pencil, you can go for, I mean, some of the sets like have like 10 pencils in or whatever. I tend to find sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming, because you just think, I can't remember which pencil to match with which tone, because there's so many. There isn't always that many different shades when you're looking. So if there is, by all means, use some of your set. But I always say not to overcomplicate it when you're getting used to it. Choose a maximum of 3 or 4 pencils, and you just want to spread them out. So pretty much anything that is a B is a soft, darker pencil. So the higher the B goes up the scale, so obviously this is 7, that's quite a high number. That's going to be very soft and very dark. And obviously I've got things like, I've got a 5B there. It doesn't really matter which you choose, as long as you've got a gap between them, really. A decent gap so that you can see the difference. So I'm just going to go for my 7B, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just on here, I'm going to shade with the darkest shade available. Okay, and that I know is going to be my darkest value that I'll use. Things like the eyelashes that are really dark on there, that's a really good kind of colour to use. So you could go right down to a B if you wanted, or another one. So I'm going to go for a 2B. I'm going to leave a gap. There's a reason. And it's good to have your pencils nice and sharp. So this is another one. This is a 2B. So obviously you see it's not as dark as there, but it's fairly dark when I'm pressing down anyway. And then when you go down the scale, HB is really kind of just your it's fairly light, isn't it? So you could go HB, or you could go into the H range, which is once you get H on, that means it's getting harder, the pencil, and it gets lighter. So again, I think this is a 5H that I've got here. It's rubbed off, but I'm sure it's 5H. When I do that, yeah, it is definitely a H. You see how light it is, and that's me pressing down quite hard. That just gives me a good range. Now, even with those 3 pencils, without adding any more to it, I can start again, and I can find one between here by using my 7B a bit more lightly. So there's a range between the two. Now I might want to press it even, a bit more, just so that it is slightly darker than that one. But then what I can do with my 2B is use that more lightly as well, so that it goes between the range here. And then same with the H, I can use that really lightly, the 5H. So this is why I was saying you don't always need like a massive amount. Now because sometimes what's really helpful as well is to learn to adjust your pressure, because if you use them all at more of a harder depth in your box, you don't ever kind of start to use your marks very lightly or loosely, because you're always kind of applying pressure to it, which it's not a natural way. I don't think personally it's not a natural way to actually draw, because when you're doing it, you might want to put these like light marks in and have a bit more freedom, rather than feeling you've got to kind of put this pressure on and just keep the colors. So I quite like to do that, so that I'm just adapting the pressure and everything. So I'm just going to go with those ones. So from there, once we do get going, and once you've selected the range, and obviously, as I said, it doesn't matter what numbers they are, as long as you've got a gap between them. Like obviously the 7B and the 2B has got 5 between it. It just makes sure that you're not repeating a very similar color, for example. And I don't even have to use that one that I've kind of done a lighter version of. I can just use, one with more pressure, a couple here, and maybe even a couple here. So there's plenty to go at with that. So I'm going to put that to the side, because I'm not going to need that for a moment anyway, but I will come back because when we start to match up, when we're doing things, when we're actually starting to shade, we will need to think, well, how dark is the darkest? And then we've got this comparison, haven't we, which we might use for the eyelashes. And we can start to match. And then that reminds us what kind of pressure to use as well, either a lot of pressure or lighter pressure, more pressure, less, etc. So we can get that kind of shading in. And we can also use 0 pressure as well to pop the marks in. So when we're drawing it out, obviously I've scaled, we can scale up a little bit. I think the only thing I would say that I would do, I'm just going to see, when you're drawing this, you want to do it quite lightly as well. Make sure that you get everything where you want it to. But again, I'm going to pop a little bit more pressure on so you can see what I'm doing. But really, I don't go just straight in and draw it. I will kind of get those curves in, but I'm going to do what I would normally do and just get the top and the bottom. So if you remember from last week, we did a little bit about the fact when you're drawing like human form or figurative work or anything like that, it's nice to get those swooping curves in so it's natural. But also to help us out, we do need to kind of have a little mark making here, just so that it will help us. And then again, how far out that you want to come with the corner of your eye as well. And you can adapt it. That's why I said if you do it nice and lightly, you can rub it out or whatever. And then this bit in the middle here, this bit that comes in. And then one of the things with this is it's like sometimes you're not sure where to line it up in the curve of the eye. So what you can do, same as we always do, we'll just get this little bit of thing, is you can just have a little look at where the corner of that eye down here, if you put it straight across, where that corner of the eye lines up with. And if you look, again, it's just fact checking. The whole corner of the eye just starts in line with that edge there, and it goes upwards. So that's quite interesting. So, you know, if you're not sure, just fact check it. So I'm going to use that. So I'm going to just pop that little bit of paper over. So now, because I was coming down, look, thinking it was down, but it's not. So the corner of this eye starts here. So I can pop that in there. And then now I know that this needs to swoop up a little bit, perhaps even a little bit higher up, actually. So I'm just going to make a little pencil rubber. So all this is just a bit of it's very old actually. I couldn't find a new one, but it's just what it does. If you've got a pencil in a rubber in a pencil, you can kind of take out marks and things from darker area. So yeah, so once you've got like your idea of where you want to start things, then you can start then to join it up. I'm finding this hard because normally because I'm left-handed, I turn my work round. So I'm actually I would turn it on its side and you know, draw it the other way around, but it will be fine. There we go. And then obviously, again, you know, if you're not sure how deep the line is, so you can do that, line it up and then look at how far it comes under. So that's another thing. It's got to come under quite a way, doesn't it? And then again, obviously that needs to be wider. You can just join it up then. Now, interestingly, with sketching, I think one of the things that is quite, I think is quite fascinating is if you don't normally do a lot of drawing, you won't know yet what your drawing style is. Because so that's why it's really good to do a little bit of drawing now and again, and obviously that's why I've come back to it from what we did last term with the portraits, because what you'll find is the more you do it, it's like any other materials, you might find that your sketching style is quite loose and free and a bit, you know, kind of rough. It almost looks a bit rough. Mine's very much like that, my sketching style. Or you might find that your sketching style is very neat and tidy, or it might be midway between the two. So what I would say over this whole session is just let out of your hand whatever comes out. Don't try and stop that natural feel of the mark making that you're doing. Okay. Because natural, you know, the way we do something natural is really important, particularly because again it's a bit like pastel, because we're very connected, aren't we, to this piece of work through our, you know, our hand and paper. So, you know, just allow it. If it is a bit kind of rough around the edges, that's fine. It doesn't matter. Not everything has to look like a photograph. And obviously with the study, we're just going to really start to look into it. I think you'll find it really fascinating. So anyway, sorry. So that's like the inner part of this eye that I'm doing. Now, what I might do is just put this top, just put another layer in this top here, where I can see the eye kind of coming, the iris and everything coming in. I'm going to pop that in there. And then I would then, you know, start to break down this iris. And the interesting thing with eyes is whenever you actually do one, there's so many variables as to how wide-eyed somebody is, what direction they're looking, you know, and obviously that will move the position in the eye. But this one, obviously, the eyelid is covered. So you've got, you know, the iris is not at the top massively curved. It curves much more here because that part of the curve here that you'd normally see is under the eyelid here at the top. You do get this little tiny bit of a gap at the bottom, very small. So again, what we can do is like have a little look on the position of how far out it starts, and how much white that you want to leave. And then the same again at this side. And you don't always know that till you get going. So just have a little go. And then obviously where the eye comes down to, and then obviously the curve there. And just have a go at joining those two round, really. Obviously we're paying attention as we're doing it to the shape of the eye, and I tend to use these little, I suppose it's like little feathery kind of marks to start with. I mean, this is darker than I would be doing it if I was doing it for myself, just in case I need to change it. But if you do these kind of little feathery movements, you're just adjusting the shape as you're doing it. That makes it a little bit easier sometimes. So, you know, if you're going a bit off, you think, all right, I'll just change it round there. And it's nice and light and feathery, so you can, you know, you can kind of adjust it or okay. That's all we're doing, we're just adjusting it. It's very interesting once you start looking at it though in really enlarged. When it's really enlarged, you'll see it's actually not perfectly still. It's perfectly round. It kind of comes out. There's almost like you know, you get the shape kind of almost little slight changes in it in the eye. It's very interesting. And then obviously from there as well, we can start to I'm just popping a little mark here where I can see that like the corner of the eye there is as well. And then again, you know, starting to look at the size of the pupil. And again, the pupil in macro, when it's really enlarged, really isn't a perfect circle. It's so interesting. And obviously it looks a perfect circle to us because when we're looking at an ordinary sized eye, the smaller things get, you know, the less you can see about where everything comes. But again, I'm just using these little feather marks just to get everything in place. There we go. And then we can go from there. So I wouldn't at this point be putting any of the eyelashes on at all, because we can start to work in the eye and look at all the things around, you know, all the little details and everything, and then we can almost get some of the shade of the skin as well. And then we want to put the eyelashes over the top. Some of them might have these like highlights on them, so I'll show you what I would do for that, because actually one of the first thing I'm going to do, so that I don't, it's a little bit like watercolor, so I don't go over it, is actually take this highlight here, this light reflection, and pop that in. And we've done this before where we've looked at glass and stuff. So I'm just going to replicate that. I'm going to just literally look at the shape that's reflected in the eye here. Like that. And I'm just going to put that in so that it reminds me, but again, do it nice and lightly. That's great. And then that we know that that's the lightest, so that's going to be the color of the paper, isn't it, pretty much, because it's really, really light. And this is why I was saying sometimes it's good if you flip back to here, you might be saying, what else have we got on here? Because you can go through and start to actually pop on some of those light areas. So I know, for example, there's a little bit down here on the eyelid as well. There's almost a little bit, so I'm going to just pop just a little mark there to remind me not to go into that shading. But again, do it, if you do it nice and lightly, you won't have any lines, like specific lines in there. And then when we start to look at the inside of the eye, which we'll do in a bit, it's looking at, you know, the other next lightest shade, you know, what is it? And this is where it's quite difficult to see on here. We can see that looks light. That looks quite grayish, because obviously we know now, it's a bloodshot eye looking at there. But it can be really, really helpful though to go look at the eye really and think, right, yeah, this is almost as white. It's getting, some of this edge is getting as white, but then we can shade into it a little bit round where these slightly darker ones are. And then this is becoming more grey. But actually, when you start to compare, on here, this looks almost the same as that. But actually, when you look at the eye here, you think, no, that's brighter than this. So those little things sometimes really help, not just looking at black and white to do that. But we'll come back to that. So if there's anything else that you can see that's light coloured, I'm going to pop in some of this underneath the eyelid as well. There's a few really bright patches. I just don't want to go into that. There's a few little ones on the eyelid as well. I'm just going to pop those on there. I'm not going to draw the eyelid just yet. I just want to focus on getting started with the eye. Like that. And then in here is slightly lighter, so where it's a shady bit, I might just pop in just a little reminder in there as well. So you're just kind of working your way through. Corner of the eye here, I can see another one. When you start looking, this is what's fascinating about doing this, because you really start to go, oh yeah, look at that, and oh, I can see that's light as well. And so from there, I'm just going to start now thinking about what colours I'm going to use. I say colours, shades and tones. So I'm going to start lightest and then go to darkest. So I'm going to look over here where this is obviously the lightest, it's the colour of the paper. Some of this, where the other little highlights are, they are really light. And this area kind of round here is quite light as well, same on here. So I'm going to shade it ever so lightly. So I'm just looking at what my lightest one is at a H. So I'm really only going to go into that minimally, a bit round here. And all we're doing is really, a lot of this is just purely observation. So I'm looking around here. Some of this is slightly darker than the actual bit of the eye. And in terms of shading, so it might not even pick up too much on here because of the, I might have to make mine slightly darker than I want to, just so you can see it on camera. That's fine though. The shading, there's so many ways. So if you've got a nice sharp pencil, you can use it on its side and kind of get quite good coverage. When we do this, it's fine to do it like that, but it's really laborious and it can take ages and ages. And if you get frustrated with how much time it's taking, by all means go, you know, when you've got some bigger areas, then just go into a different shading. But you can also do little circular motions as well, which a lot of people like to do. I find it goes a bit darker if I do that, but you just try and see what's right for you. Because I don't want it to be that dark. I want to really light, right, like it really light over here. So we're just finding a way of for you of shading any bits. Obviously that's paper color, but so it's again we're just making decisions, and I'm quite happy that this eye is very, very light. You can also do something called cross hatching, so you can kind of like go one way. That's great for getting texture and things, and then you can go that way as well. There are different ways of cross hatching, or you can just go one way and just kind of leave gaps behind it, between it. There's all sorts of ways of shading, but this is what I was saying, just have a go and stick with the one that is working for you, is what I would say. It's a little bit of a process, isn't it, building it up? And it will look a bit flat for a while, but once we start to get the definition, it's going to look great, really great. So yeah, just keep working away with it. And then you can kind of flip over the other side as well and start to compare. So, you know, is there anywhere? So there might be some kind of even darker spots on here that you can go in with, like just some little marks and things. Like what you get is these lovely you know, lovely little blood capillaries and things like that. You start to pop those over the top. You know, see what we've got there. I'm just building up this picture all the time. So it's, you know, at the beginning, it doesn't look much, does it? So then you can start to, you know, start to get some shading in this side as well. And obviously we're trying to be fairly light. It's still lightish. It's just got a bit of a tinge, hasn't it? So yeah, just keep going. It's very absorbing, and that's what I would say about it. Really absorbing, because you can start to see all the different tones, just building that up. Getting your own kind of shadows and everything. All of those in. She even kind of put some shape to the eye as well by some of the curved shading and everything as well. And then again, you know, starting to look at like how dark to make these. So this is where, if you're not sure, you can go kind of look on the brightness of this here and kind of make a decision. It's, you know, and compare to some of the other areas and think, okay, well, it's not quite as dark as this for definite. Although on there, you see, it does look it, doesn't it? Some of that's almost as dark as that. This is, isn't it? This is really quite dark. But some of this up here, if you're struggling to see on the black and white, just flip up here. Just keep looking. And then you can start to shade, you know, start to kind of find the right tone. It might be that one's too light now. You might need to go to your next side, you know, your next tone up. Kind of make some of these shapes. And we're just kind of wiggling along, aren't we? Just making some of these, these capillary marks and everything. And then, we're just kind of comparing how dark we need to make that. In the corner of the eye and everything. You're just working your way through. These into place, because when you start, when we start looking, it does give it a little bit of shape and depth as well, doesn't it? Having the shadow. And you can have a little look at any other patterns you can see, any areas that are slightly darker, so it gets quite dark around this area of the eyelid as well, on this corner. So you can start to pop in any areas that are even darker, you can see. Sometimes it casts the shadow, doesn't it? So under this side of the eye, much darker there, and you can almost compare it. You might think, actually, that one is as dark as the other one, as my real deep toned. And if you feel it's that colour, then start to kind of get the real, some of those that real depth in there. Yeah, and then like all the way under here, there's a dark area as well. We're just observing all of these little intricacies of the eye, really. It's fascinating. Under here, you can start to work in, that's very dark. You can start to work in some of the colours in this corner. And again, if you're not sure, come back to your coloured one and think, oh, it's lightish, it's not too dark in there, but then around it is darker. I'm going back to this middle one, this 2B, for some of these shadier areas around it, around that little light bit that we marked off earlier. And if you're doing this in paint, then you're just building those mid-tones up and your darks, and then you put your highlights on, so yours will look, you won't see the highlight until much further down. So yeah, so keep building those tones. And then when you get to a point where you feel you've done what you can in the eye, and then we'll start to move into the iris, and that's really interesting. Now you can do it whichever way you prefer. I tend to prefer to go and get my darkest value in the middle first. And I'm working quite quickly, but carefully, just so I get an even spread of pencil. So I'm going to just make sure I can kind of get the shape that I want. Before I darken it anymore. And then it's entirely up to you. You can even put work in reverse on the eye if it helps you to put some of these lines in to kind of get some of the pattern in. And also, if you look at the shape, it's like, I'll tell you what it's like. It's like the center of a flower. If you look, because it almost kind of comes in a curve. Some of these are like a little bit slightly curved, as though they're coming out of the flower. It's really fascinating when you start looking at that. So I'm going to get some of these in, and then I can work around, making sure I've got this light, areas of light in. But it just gives us a little bit of, it gets the shape of the eye and shows the actual depth of it, and how fascinating the shape is. So just, and again, you don't have to do it that way. If that's, you prefer to kind of not, that's absolutely fine. And you can work then, start to do the shading this way and work outwards, or you can even get a bit of the shadow on the edge. It's entirely up to you really which way you want to work it. I think I'm going to go back and try and decide. Maybe this is, to me, it's a bit more of a mid-tone, this shading, but then we've got this very light one, but it's not white. So I'm going to go back to this really light shade here. I mean, it is nude, isn't it? It's very, very light. So I'm going to try and shade around it. I don't know if you've noticed, but you get these lovely, almost, looks a bit like a rhubarb leaf in some places, where you get these little kind of edge to edge here. So I might even pop that in so that I know that where I've got to avoid, and the light bits will go in there in those gaps. So I'm going to do that, pop those in. But any method that's going to help you, then that's all good. And then, when you start to get, so there's between there, isn't there? There's also some, these slightly darker ones. So again, I'm going to go back to my 2B in between and I'm trying to get some of those. And you can use like lines, dots, whatever you feel is building up that nice image for you, then just go with that. You can continue that curve round if you want here. I'm just looking between these, what kind of a shape I'm getting there, coming out from the eye. That's all we can do, is just really observe. I will take a pause in a mo and come and see how everybody's doing. And then the other side of that, then we've got to look, the other side of that, where this is very light here, I'm just going to make sure I leave. I'm going to pop in some of these lines. I can see these darker ones. So I'll go back in with the darker. So some of these lines continue in some way. So I'm just going to go pop in those in. So I've got some pattern to just to check. There's maybe no pattern, any patterns that are continuing. Some are, some aren't. And there'll be like ones to shade in as well that you'll notice. And then just come back to so we need to make sure we're avoiding the light area. We want to keep that nice and light, don't we? Nice and bright. It all makes sense as we start to get those darker colours in really around it, and then it will start. So here, where we've got the edge of this box as well, there's some tiny bits of shadow come into it. So I'm going to bring those in, just a very few. You can just kind of see, obviously, where there are sections of it, but then there's a nice crisp darker line, isn't there? The other side of the box, where we can bring in these darker colours up to. Because we do get that crisp line with them. So yes, we're just almost working in and around it. I'm just using lots of like little lines, but use whatever's coming out, whatever your hand's doing, you do that. And then we're just continuing, aren't we? You know, really, we're looking at the tones. If there's some lighter ones, we can pop the lighter ones in. So we're just working through this process all the time. You know, and you almost, sometimes you get bands of it and sometimes you don't. There's just like light colours coming through it. So, you know, pop those light ones in. You know, there's almost, they almost come out, don't they? So you can see that more clearly on here. Where you get these nice light areas. Just have a go and pop them in like that. If there's any kind of a pattern, sometimes you get these lovely shapes, don't you, on the eye like that. Then between it gets a bit darker. So just keep going with any patterns that you can see on there as well. I'm going to just stop though and just I'll see how everybody's getting on. Take a break there. Right, so what we can do at this point, we're just talking about this, is sometimes it just helps to see it a bit better if you start to go in with a little bit of the darks. So by all means do that. So what I've been looking at here is like these real darks we were looking at before, weren't they? And I thought that was almost as dark as the eyelashes, some of these values, but you can almost look at the eye here. So you can go slightly lighter if you want to with the colour, if you know that is slightly lighter than the eyelashes, but it's almost as dark, isn't it? So so just have a go. So start to kind of fill in some of these darker details, might just really help. And again, you know, you're getting all the shape in there, so you know, just decide, do you want to shade with kind of blocks of shape, or do you want to just kind of like try and recreate the feathered effect that you get in the eye? So we're just kind of going around and following the shape. When you do zoom into that eye though, like we've just been talking about, you do start to see that the edge almost kind of comes into the edge of the eye a bit. We can't see that at this size. If you really want to look and really zoom into those photographs, it's very, very interesting what you can see. But you'll start to then see, it's like, yeah, it feels a bit more kind of lifelike now with these popping in some of these colours, these darks. And that's where you can avoid, you know, if you've got one of those light lines in there, a reflection of the light and that kind of thing, you can leave that out. And then start to kind of bring it down. So we did put a little bit of the shadow in here on this lid, but if you need to bring it down a little bit, you can do that. You know, again, we're looking at the edge of the eye. You need to just kind of work your way around that with that feathered effect. See, down this corner, there isn't actually that many patches. So we're just kind of really looking carefully at what we can see, where the patterns are. The more is the less. Is it regular pattern and then it disappears? You know, all these little things are just great for observation. Really gets us looking in a lot of detail. Yeah, so we're just kind of building this up much more now. And then you can start to bring those darks into these, you know, into these shapes if you want to as well. And where do you get some darker ones in there? Is it as dark as the outer eye, or is it slightly different? So you could, if you've got some slightly darker patches, then pop those in. There is a bit of a pattern to those, isn't there, in parts? Yeah, so you can then see, can't you? Have a little look. Are there any? How's it all going? What can you see? And then what you can do then as well is you can start to kind of fill the other gaps between, or darken any a little bit further if you think, oh, you know what, this edge needs more pressure on, whatever, you know, start to do that. And the same, you know, if you're starting to see any other little bits that you think I need to now, you know, come in and darken those ones. You can get those in. I'm just going to take a little bit of mine up here. Yeah, so we're just kind of popping anything in, anything else that you think needs to go in. And then, you know, to work out between what you want to pop in, and just if it's obviously slightly lighter, but you're not quite sure, then you can always go in with a different tone that you've not used. You know, is it compare this tone? Is it as light? No, it's not, but it might be a very light tone of your mid one. So you can always do that if you're not sure. Just you know, as long as you've got your light ones in, which you have. And you can start to kind of fill in those with an ordinary, you know, your middle tone. That's what I would do. Very, very absorbing. It's really good. And then again, you know, you can go in there and start to, you know, if darken any areas. Like I'm looking now and thinking this bit here coming off the pupil is as dark as this outside, but it's not on here. So what we're doing is we're comparing the values. So I would go in and darken that because I haven't got it as quite as dark as I would like. So it's those kind of little things that you can start to do. And it might be like that across the eye. So there might be other areas in there. You think, oh yeah, that's quite dark in there, but I've not made that as dark. I'm just going to make sure that now all kind of matches and everything. Because I want to see the contrast here. start to pop those in. And it might be to make the light bit pop out a bit that you have to slightly darken off some of the areas around it so that that pops a little bit more. Yeah, particularly here where we've got this. So you can see all the time we're making changes that are really going to help with that contrast. In your own style, you know, and get your own mark making in to represent what you see, which is really important. I know I always say it, but we don't all want, you know, just these like 30 things the same, do we? You want to be able to kind of represent how you're naturally doing it. So yes, I'm just going to kind of add still a bit more definition to this. I'm going to deepen this this bit here because I'm happy with the contrast being really dark. So I'm going to go in even further with that. And this is what we're doing. This is where we get it to pop a little bit. You don't have to go with a really dark contrast. And I've said this before. So if it's too intense for you, then by all means, you know, you do not need to make it that dark. But for me, I like with pencil to see the definition in my own piece anyway. Okay. And that's only like obviously a small area. You can also look in the bits that you've done as well and think, okay, is there anything else? So once you've got that in, then obviously there's other little bits, isn't there? There's a very light area on here. And then when we're looking at this kind of inner lid here, you're starting to, you know, almost put the shading on this inner lid here. Because we know it's not really dark, but it's not white. This is lighter coming around there. And again, you can make that up here lighter by putting some darker definition in it. This definitely is very dark under there, which we established. Yes, we can just start to kind of like see what's underneath. And same with this bottom lid here. We kind of see the corner. We've got these light areas there. So what we're thinking about is we're popping this lid in. We know that there's like, we can see the lid, but it's not, it's part of the, becomes part of the skin as well. But I'm just gonna, because it's the softness of the inside of it, isn't it? It's almost glistening as well, that draws our attention to it. So I'm not putting a solid line then. What I'm going to do is just make it quite light, because again, it is it's very similar to this side, isn't it? This colour here. So again, it's just making that decision and avoiding any areas that are kind of light. And I've got like glistening bits of fluid on, as you do sometimes get a little bit of a damp eyelid. You can kind of go around there. And yeah, we're just paying attention to that shape. You know, any kind of definition on there. Any bumps in the skin, etc. And then also underneath the eye, so you get a very light patch under here. So I think I've popped that in there. So I'm going to go around that. But then you've got things like, you know, any lines underneath. So I'm going to put them in with a light pencil first. Any kind of you know, bumps in the skin, or you know, you might have some shading in the skin there that's a bit darker. So I might go now to a slightly different darker pencil to start to pop those in. I'm not going to go with my darkest because that's not as dark as this. I'm just going to, you kind of get like the shape of the skin, don't you, as well, like the bumps and everything that you get sometimes under your eye. Pop those in. So again, if you've got any areas that need to be a bit more shady, like a bit darker under there, pop those in underneath the, and these are underneath, aren't they? The actual the actual eyelid, all the way down. You almost get little patterns here as well. We're going to go over the top of these very dark eyelashes anyway, so it's just, I'm just getting the bits I can see in now that are a bit more definite. I mean, you can go into minute detail, but you don't have to as well. You can almost okay. And then around these these lighter areas that we've got in here where the skin's glistening underneath, because we'll put the eyelashes over the top anyway. Start to pop those in. So, yeah, any other areas of the skin, you know, just keep looking at where there's a bit more, maybe a little bit more shadow in there. Just do that, pop those in. Fascinating when you start really looking in all the little intricacies of the skin and everything. It's really interesting, isn't it? So I'm just going to make those pop a little bit, I'm just going to kind of darken under there. A few light patches under these eyelashes, isn't there? And when we put them over the top, it'll just fit over. You know, just go as far down or as high as you want to do. I'm just going to go to there and comes out a little bit further. And then the top as well. So obviously under here, it's dark, it's much darker, isn't it? Like this side's a lot darker under here, but that's really looking really dark under there. But it's not got to be obviously as dark as. So this is where you might want to almost, some of these eyelashes are going to leave a white mark, aren't they? In areas. So I'm going to, if I can see it's white where it catches the light and then it's very dark underneath, I'm just going to try and pop as many of those ones in as I can so we go around it. I'm not going to, I can't say I'm going to get every single one, but we'll try. And then I'm going to shade underneath that. There's a few. More over this side, aren't they? There's a couple here that are lighter as well, which I could get in. So that's one way of doing it. And then, you know, if we compare again, this is so dark at this top here, but then just got to be bear in mind that some of this eyelid here quite wide and light on this edge. You can see that that's where the darker That's where the darker, it starts to get darker, doesn't it, on there? But a lot of this is quite light. Around the edge of the eye, the top of the eyelid here. It's just hidden underneath, so it is light. But then in there is where it gets really dark. So we're just observing all the time, aren't we? So it's much darker under there. So it's really how we get this darker colour in between these very light lashes that we're going to try and leave and highlight. Now, of course, the other way of doing it is taking it out with a rubber pencil. It's not always as easy, but we'll just have a little go. See, just popping these in like this for the time being. And some people like to use gel pen, other people really don't. Like just put a little white gel pen line or whatever over the top. Not cheating or anything, you know. As I said before, there's lots of ways of doing things. So I'm just going to start to go in between a little bit here where I can see there are areas of colour, and then make it lighter. So it's only where I'm only going to pop this in where I actually see these light coloured, these light coloured eyelashes. Make sure I go up to the edge of the eyelashes so we get a bit of definition there. And then as it comes towards the eyelid, gets a bit lighter, doesn't it? It's like variegated almost. So again, we can make it a bit deeper as we go up to the eyelash edge. Another one there. And then that's not quite as dark as we're coming in, it's slightly lighter. It's very interesting, isn't it, when you're looking at all of these dark shades even. And we follow it all the way around. But again, as we're coming round, it's not quite as dark as it was. The edge of that glare is really dark. This is kind of more dark near the base, where the eyelashes are, and it gets a bit lighter as we come over this side. So you can almost, like when it gets around here, it's much lighter, isn't it? So I'm going to go back to my my H here, because I've got to look, that's similar. And, you know, in some areas the top's even lighter, so you know, just start popping that in. Then there's this bit that we went round here, look, we popped this in earlier, didn't we? This like light patch here, so we're kind of getting those in. This is quite light on this edge, so I have to ignore my other sketchings on there. And we're starting to kind of try and recreate a bit of the skin and the direction. We can create direction really well with pencil. Flow. And remembering that a lot of this is going to be covered up. And again, you know, I would then get the eyelashes in, and then we can work between the eyelashes as well to see the other tones. And we can deepen them. Some of these we can just kind of blend a little bit more lighter, so we're not. And these are a bit darker around these. Okay, and then once you start to get your eyelashes in, again, you know, start with a lighter, like a mid-tone one if you want to get them in. You can, I'm going to continue on the top actually, and you'll see like the way they come out, and then the direction of them. So it's like just finding one and tracking it round really. So a lot of these ones that have already highlighted actually start, don't they, underneath here, as they are, and they're quite thick. So we need to obviously make sure they're thick enough because they're as thick as the top bit. So that's just one of these eyelashes catching the light, really. So once we start to kind of like put them all in, and then with the other ones that are very dark as well over the top, it all just starts to make perfect sense. Like, oh yeah. You know, and they come the loop underneath, don't they? So you get them coming down into this area. Just keep working round with them. And they do cross over all sorts of interesting shades, don't we? You know, and then go, if you're feeling then comfortable with the amount, like how dark they are, then just go straight in with your dark one. Sometimes once you start working them and you realize they don't have to be perfect because they just kind of, they do go a bit higgledy-piggledy, don't they, on here? And you can just keep going. And sometimes they're not going to be exactly as they are on the drawing, but you're getting the general idea of what the way eyelashes are going. As they come in here, they obviously get wider. That's interesting in itself. Longer and wider as they come toward, and they overlap, don't they, as well? We're just building them up. Just let them go, you know, kind of flick them out. Keep going. You know, and we can't really see the tops either, so don't worry too much about that. You can continue them on, or you can just, what we're really doing is a study of how eyelashes work on top of the eye. And how they overlap and how they come, you know, they drop down into the eyelid sometimes as well. Just the odd stray ones. It's really interesting, isn't it? And that's like you get the odd one like that, it just kind of hooks under. Until, you know, you've built them up and get them as kind of as much as thicker or as you know, as thin as you want to get them, really. And this one's with quite a lot of eyelashes on there, but there's also a lot of depth in the distance. So the other thing we can do then as well is have a little look at what you've got, and then look at between. Do you need to darken anything between any of these? You know, that's really dark over here. Does it need to continue a bit? I'd probably say yes. I want to go between it and just keep that nice and dark in the background there. So there's all these little things that we can do. Like it gets quite dark, doesn't it, around in some of the base of these eyelashes as well. Do you need to put any shade anywhere else as well in here? Does it need to come down a bit further, this dark? So we're just looking at all of these different elements really. And then we can do the same here. So now we're looking at you know, the direction of the bottom ones. And it's amazing how it really, really does start to transform. I think it's incredible. You know, you start with this eye and there's hardly anything in it, and then, you know, starting to get some really, really interesting you know, getting all of these in, and it's really like where, you know, observing where they start from. You know, do they come downwards? Do they kind of go to the side? Do they overlap? All of these decisions that we're making really. And again, obviously this goes off the page. We can't really see how long these are. But you're just getting a nice study. That's the important thing today. Just to learn a little bit more about how eyes work, how we can get the tone with the pencil, etc. And we're just, you know, we're just looking at those things. And again, we can then start to have a little look at what we've got. You know, is there anything else we need to pop in there? Do we need to darken anything off? Do we need to make the capillaries a bit more obvious, for example? Do we want to pop a little bit more in there? You know, have we got enough, or do we want to actually add a little bit more kind of skin tone and things like that, or bumps or anything? So we're just making those decisions all the time really about it. You know, and how do you want to represent it? That's the other thing, you know. We'll go to probably into more detail in the skin tone, but I'm keeping my eyelashes quite fluffy, so I'm not going to go too much in the detail, but you could if you wanted to. So these are all the decisions that you start to make about it. That's fascinating though, really fascinating. So yes, we're just looking at it all the time. You know, what do we want to put in? But, you know, all the tones and things that you can observe. You know, then you can go back and look at your eye, because you've got all these very dark tones, and think, okay, is there any other areas that I perhaps want to kind of add a bit of more depth or darkness to? You know, I can see I've got some lines in here I haven't even noticed, these darker ones. That's much darker there. So, you know, you could go round and do that and keep it. Again, as well, you might want to kind of just sharpen up your where you these light ones are. Like here, I've missed one out. Actually, but I could, you know, make that darker around and just have a little bit of a little shine in there. Here, where you've got a little bit on the eyelid, look. Just kind of like go round it a little bit so it's got more definition. So I hope that's been really helpful. And that's the last pause there, and I'll hope you enjoy doing it. It's very, very absorbing, which is great, really great for observation.